You know that Keeley Companies is all about fostering the world-class culture through their incredible cultural pillars. Well, it was time to add a seventh cultural pillar, Keeley Green. Guided by the mission to raise the sustainability standards by which they design, build, operate, and live, Keeley Green is dedicated to using a holistic approach to leave a positive impact on our environment, create a future that is sustainable for generations to come. In the words of Rusty Keeley, we are just getting started. You can learn more about that just getting started mentality and all the work they do by visiting my friends at Keeley Companies online at keeleycompanies.com.
Welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. John is the #1 national best-selling author of the book On Fire. He's a world-class inspirational speaker, and he's the host of the Live Inspired podcast. John interviews extraordinary individuals on their life story so that you can wake up from accidental living and more fully live your life story. Here's your host, John O'Leary.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. Just 8 months ago, our guest, her name is Brie Bauer, was 27 weeks pregnant with her third child when suddenly a life-threatening infection changed her life forever. In observing that the baby's heart rate was beginning to become a bit more faint, the doctors decided that it was time for them to go for a C-section. The baby was delivered safely. That's great news. But the mother, Brie, became far more sick. Yes, she did deliver a healthy baby boy, but then she spent the next 10 days in a coma where her body fought off toxic shock syndrome from Group A strep. With her strength and her willpower tested, she made a brave choice that redefined her life in ways she never imagined. You see, Brie agreed to have her 4 limbs amputated so that they could save her life. Today, Brie shares her story of how learning to embrace a new normal as she navigates life as a wife and a mother of 3 little ones, while also dealing with amputations of all 4 of her limbs. With unyielding spirit, she talks about the power of the support that surrounded her in that time in hospital and subsequently, and how she continues to choose courage and choose joy every step of the way. My friends, brothers and sisters, leaders and servants, whether you are facing challenges or you love someone who is, this conversation with Brie is a powerful reminder of our innate strength and that our lives are a precious, priceless gift. We have one job. It is to say yes to being used for good. That yes is something that Brie gives us loud and clear through her life. So do me a favor and give a big ovation to my friend, soon to be yours. Her name is Brie Bauer. Brie, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Thank you for having me, John.
This is an honor. I know you are in the midst of a wild journey that we're going to be unpacking together. But rather than going into this Genesis moment, this inflection point in your story, I want to slow play it a little bit. I want to talk about just life before life changed so dramatically. So first of all, where were you born?
Kansas City. I grew up there, and that's where I am today.
When you were a kid, what was your dream? What did you want to do when you got older?
Be a nurse. I watched ER, the show, a lot, and I thought just the nurses were so cool. And I was just lucky enough to have that mindset. And I know or a lot of people nowadays just don't know what to do in life. And I was lucky enough to have that goal, and I've loved my job.
Take us through a few of the things you did, because I think each of them, in some ways, medically and maybe emotionally, were preparing you for your own experience. So were some
Yeah.
of your jobs as a young nurse?
In the beginning, it's bedside nursing. I did what's called a progressive care, which is like a step down where you get a lot of patients, but still with high acuity needs. There was a point where I worked with the family medicine, which is really anything could happen. And then when I moved to Denver, it was a mesh of you're going to get anything, everything, oncology, vascular, post surgical. You just had to know it all almost. But when you work on a unit, you have such amazing support from other nurses. But I really enjoyed palliative care. It just spoke to me. And I did a little class in palliative care. And through that, I made a connection with the VA in Denver. Their research group needed a clinical nurse with palliative care experience to be in a study that focused on how to improve quality of life. And so I took that job and with that group dove into data and collecting data. The VA has wonderful data because they use the same system nationwide. And I created a dashboard that provided live data for nurses and social workers to use just to see the items that would most benefit them. So I'm excited to get back to that once I start working again.
So we talked a lot about work and education and nursing. And before we talk about your story that has you on the other side of the stethoscope, I want to learn a little bit more about your personal life. Talk about where you met Reed and what was it about this man that you fell for?
Oh gosh, I don't know. So we met at K-State. We were both, I was in a sorority and he was in a fraternity. So old love story, how it goes, where we met at a fraternity party and he was the one handing out the red Solo cups. And I asked for one. And I thought he was really cute, but he did not give me any kind of response. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna just have fun. And by the middle of the party, we ended up reconnecting. And at the time, I had a cast. I'd broken my wrist, but I was so fed up with people asking, "Hey, what happened with your cast?" And he was pointing to it, and I was like, "Oh, he's just gonna ask what happened." And instead, he's, "Hey, that's a nice cup holder." My hands were like a perfect. You put a cup right in it, and I thought that was so funny. But that's how we met.
It's a great way for a wonderful love affair to begin. That's where John O'Leary met his wife Beth, as well at a fraternity party. So,
Really? Oh, interesting.
yeah, so I'm not going to cheapen the beginning of your love story. I think it's a great place to begin love. So, outside of him not looking at your broken wrist and saying, "Hey, what happened? Why do you have a cast?" As you began dancing and sipping on that silo cup and moving forward through K-State and beyond, foundationally, what is it about Reed that just sets him apart and makes him worth spending life with?
I love to make him laugh. He makes me laugh all the time, but one of my favorite things in life is to make him laugh because then I'm like, oh, that was actually funny on my part.
Who's
And
funnier?
me, for sure.
All right, so eventually you're going to leave K-State. When did you get married?
We actually eloped in Denver. We went to Sapphire Point, and in Denver, we brought the papers up to this beautiful area of Sapphire Point, and just photographers were there. And we said our vows that we wrote ourselves. Reed actually forgot his vows. So he had to quickly write down on his phone what he could remember needing to say. But we did that and we signed the papers up there. So we have pictures of us signing on each other's back. And then from there, we just went around the mountains and took some photos. At that time, we were hoping just immediate family would be there. But my dad was diagnosed with multiple myeloma just around that time. He couldn't go, and then so we were like, we would feel bad if Reed's parents were there, but not my parents. So we were just like, let's just go ourselves. And it was a blast.
Eventually, you come down the mountain, you rejoin the families, you
Mhm.
begin life together. And first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the baby and the baby
We
carriage.
we had Brooks
Yes.
in 2019, and then COVID hit, and I got pregnant and had Barrett in 2021. All of those pregnancies were pretty normal. And that's when we moved back to Kansas City. It's around 2021 too.
Then a year and a half, 2 years later, you get pregnant for the third time. And it's
Hmm.
from all telltale signs, a very normal, typical pregnancy.
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
February 2024, your life changes in a profound way. And
Mhm.
You and I even talked right before we hit record, like we don't want to spend all day in this story, but this story is so transformational. So we have to spend a little bit
Mhm.
of time in it. What do you remember from the morning of February 17th?
It is pretty vivid still in my mind. To have a little bit of reference, us talking today, it's a normal day.
Right.
It's just, but on that February 17th, my shoulders felt sore. And I was like, when you're pregnant and you might have the flu, you need to do something about it. So I told myself, let's just get checked up for the flu. Let's go to my primary care, urgent care. My husband stayed with the kids, and my mom took me to urgent care. And there's about 7 people in front of me. And for some reason, I was like, I don't want to wait. Let's go somewhere else. And we went to my OB's urgent care, which was just a little bit further away. But when we made it there, they immediately hooked us up. Again, just it felt like going to a doctor's appointment, like any other doctor's appointment. But when mom and I looked at the scanner from the little things they put on your belly, we just see these bumps up and down. Just I'm trying to think of. I still have kind of a word searching delay, but the lines were showing my contractions, and it was just up, down, up, down, up, down. And we're like, that can be contractions. I don't feel anything. And the doctors came in, they took some blood, everything was fine. Once my husband came, had to switch off with my mom. I remember seeing him holding my 2 boys, and then my mom stepping out with the boys. And then it just, if I had fingers, I would snap right now. It just went down from there, where I started getting left-sided pain. They had me go on my hands and knees because they saw the baby was in trouble. His heart rate or something kept going down. And then they were like, we got to do an emergency C-section. And again, at that time, I think like, as a nurse, I
Yes.
trusted them. And if they say the baby's got to get out, let's do it. I don't want, there's reason for doing it, so let's do it.
Can I
Uh,
ask you about that? Because all you've really talked about so far is a little bit of shoulder pain, flu symptoms, maybe.
mhm, mhm.
And then you said if people were really listening, if I had fingers, I would snap them right now. That's how quickly this happened. So if I had
Uh-huh.
fingers, so something dramatic is about to happen here.
Mhm.
But your focus at that point was, hey, if the baby's in trouble, let's get this baby out.
Yeah.
Did you have any concern for you at that point?
Mm-mm. Not at all. I felt that C-sections have a good rate of mortality, and I trusted the doctor, and I just went with it. I went with it just because of maybe like the internal feelings of things are okay. Usually my intuition is pretty good. I just felt fine doing it. I just again went with it. No questions.
You were 27 weeks pregnant.
Mhm.
Take us forward from there. They take you for C-section.
And the last thing I remember was them putting the mask over my face and saying, count down from 10. And I started counting. I do remember being like, God, this is taking forever for me to, and then I just zonked out. And I apparently did not wake up again for another 10 days.
Let the audience know your little beautiful baby is healthy and fine and
Yes,
continuing to grow after being born
yes,
at just 27 weeks, which is remarkable in and
just
of
agreed.
itself.
Mhm.
But he's not doing the interview. I'm stuck with his mom. So I'm going to keep the focus over here on you, mom, for a little bit
Okay,
longer.
okay.
You wake up 10 days later. How has your life changed in those 10 days?
I, I can review what happened really between the 17th and the 18th. And I still do this. I try to pull as much information from family members as I can, including my husband. Just like saying, what happened? What was like, how did it feel? What were the doctors telling you? And at first, all I got in return was, it was awful. Like my husband and my mom were, that's all they could say is that it was just awful. And my mom, she's just, she's an angel on earth. We had lost my dad a couple months before. And so we're all dealing with that. And then this happens. As time, I think that they were just in shock as well. We're all still in shock of this happening, but I've gotten more and more from them. And during that time, after I had the C-section and what the doctors, I had placental abruption, which is usually women die from that because they can't stop the bleeding from the placenta, but somehow they worked magic and they closed me up, but my blood pressure just tanked. And they went up to my husband and said, we have to do a hysterectomy. If we don't do it, she's going to die. And then they also included, if we do the surgery, she most likely will die. And so two outcomes like that. Of course, my husband's, let's try it. And so did the hysterectomy. Then they found these like necrotic areas. My colon was necrotic and something else. But luckily, 24 hours after they tested the placenta, they found the culprit, which is strep A. Strep A is pretty strong and it will attack those areas where your immunity is less. As a pregnant woman, your immunity is down significantly. And I don't know if that's really discussed much, but because of that fact, if I was not pregnant and had strep A, I would have been fine. But since I was pregnant, it could attack, and that's what happened. And that's what it did. And once they found strep A, they gave me the antibiotics needed, but still my body was trying to cope from another issue called DIC, where your blood will clot in areas that doesn't need to be clotted. And then it also will not clot where it
Right.
needs to clot.
I had to
And
look it up when I read this in your case, disseminated intravascular coagulation. I
nice. Yeah,
never heard of it before. It becomes like your worst enemy.
it
It-
is.
so tell us then, what's this leading you toward?
Having a blood pressure so low, your body's losing oxygen. And they give you medications that they're called pressors. They help increase your blood pressure, but it really just focuses on your major organs. It's amazing what the body does. When this was going on, not only were these medications somewhat helping, your body tries to shunt blood just to your main organs. But unfortunately, that leaves your limbs without flow, without oxygenated blood flow. And that's, I would say, a few hours after the C-section. Them doing all these treatments, my fingers started turning blue, my nose started turning blue, toes, and they just slowly, it got worse. I shouldn't say slowly because I think in about 48 hours, everything was blue, limb wise. And it progressed from there, where in the end, when I woke up 10 days later, they showed me my limbs and they looked as if they were like mummified. I always remember my hand like kind of curled down, crispy looking.
Yes.
And I was just like, let's get them off. We got to get these things off because I want to do rehab. I want to see what I can do to get better.
So I've never heard you say that before. So the decision ultimately to amputate, because it's not just hands, I'll let you describe what ultimately had to be removed.
Mhm.
But that decision was yours.
And I'm so glad you said that because the amputation discussion was started February 19th. And my mom, she was so adamant about allowing me to make that choice. Then again, in order to do the amputations, I had to be transferred to a different hospital. They didn't know whether or not I could even speak. But having that lack of oxygen, they don't know what kind of brain damage I may have had, but they still wanted to try. So my mom was just like, we'd rather hear from her than do it and her wake up without her limbs.
So for you and I have been talking before we hit record and know each other's stories. And for my parents, they were in charge of a minor, so it was their decision. And they describe it as the worst day, maybe in their lives, certainly during that time in hospital. We were in hospital for about 5 months, where the doctor required them to amputate fingers in order to save this child's life. And my dad refused. And so my mom started crying and she took the pen and she was going to, but she couldn't do it. So my dad takes it back and he's crying, signs this paper, and they take their son for surgery. And then I wake up without fingers and it just shattered me. And I
Really?
blamed them. And it's certainly not their fault, but I certainly blame them if
Right.
they did. So you have the say, you have the agency to make this decision, and you say, you know what, take it, because
Yeah.
I'm ready to begin therapy. I'm ready to begin returning to some semblance of life if I can get there. What was
Hmm.
that decision? As they're about to take you away from surgery, when I wake up from this one, I wake up in a completely different world
Hmm.
than the one I'm leaving right now.
To put some context behind this, they unwrapped everything a couple days after I woke up from a coma. I'm sure there's still, mental wise, some disconnect from reality because that's a whole other story is
All right.
what my brain went through coming off of the coma and the terror it was. And of course, like a billion people were around me. It felt like just because they wanted to see my reaction.
Yes.
And they started with the arms, and I was just like, that is so crazy. Again, not truly absorbing why they were like that. But I guess, and I was just in the moment, and I saw the legs, and I just was like, they're dead. They're dead. I don't want to keep something that's dead on me. They're useless. I can't really stand on them. I just was thinking that I wanted them off, not truly comprehending what that will impact, how that would impact my life and the way I understand it now.
So you go through the DIC, you have strep A, toxic shock syndrome, you have a hysterectomy, portions of the colon are removed. Then they start amputating. And
Mhm.
please correct me if any of this is wrong, but left elbow, uh, your left arm just below your elbow, your right
Yeah,
arm just above your elbow, your right leg at your hip, and your left leg just above the knee.
correct. And each surgery, they actually wanted to delay amputations as long as they could
All right.
because they treated it as, why can I, when you get really cold,
Hypothermia,
or like, yeah,
hypothermia.
like frostbite,
Mhm.
like that's interesting because when they took off the bandages and I saw everything, I just told them, I'll tell people I climbed my Mount Everest. And that's why it's like this. But yeah, they wanted to delay because for a frostbite scenario, sometimes tissue will grow back. So we waited, and I'm not one to wait. And while we were waiting, a fungal infection started growing on my leg. And fungus will thrive off of dead tissue. That's another reason I'm like, can we start the surgeries? There's a fungal infection in my leg. And then I went septic again. And so it's just, let's get these things rolling so I just don't get sicker while I'm in the hospital. And they started with arms. This is what kills me every time thinking back about this. And at that moment, for instance, my left arm, I think we had 3 or 4 surgeries just for that left arm where they just kept cutting. They just kept cutting back. And every time I woke up in the or post-op, I would ask the nurse what they did and look at my arm and just more was gone.
Yes.
Because unfortunately, what my skin was showing on top wasn't really showing what was going on inside. So they would open me up and see more dead tissue, and then they would to take that out and then cut more bone. And that was hardest. especially the right leg, where I was told, and again, the right leg had already gone through one or two surgeries, and at that point, it was above the knee, and I was told that they just need to clean it up and close it.
Yeah.
I did ask, what's the worst thing that could happen? And they told me the worst thing would be if they had to take out my whole leg. But they're like, we don't anticipate that at all. And I woke up and it was gone. Just, uh, just my whole everything. And as I didn't cry, I don't think I really cried while I was in the hospital at all. I'm not sure why, but now it's you soak it in a little bit more. I remember just taking a deep breath and saying, I'm sure they had a good reason why they needed to take it out. Because I did trust all these doctors because they knew my story and they wanted the best. Unfortunately, when they have to do that kind of thing, there's no tourniquet. There's no way to stop the bleeding.
Yes.
And unfortunately, something broke loose. And when I got back to my room, the nurse anesthetist found it like a bubble and she touched it and it was just all blood. So it was hemorrhaging out again. Uh, and that whole scenario is so trippy to me. They had me on ketamine. And the purpose of ketamine is really just to take you away from your body. And that's what happened. I was just so confused and knew I was in pain, but I didn't feel it. It's the weirdest thing. But when I went back to surgery, there had been three or four doctors that helped with all, at least one of the limbs. When went back to surgery to figure out how to close this hemorrhaging area up, all of them were there. And it was just a miracle. And they worked together and got me closed up. And that was that. That was the last surgery I had for amputation wise. And it worked. And I was sad. But again, in my mind, they had to do what they had to do. If they left any blackened tissue, it would have got infected.
Brie, while they're slowly cutting you apart, they're slowly removing who you once were, what's keeping you going? Because more than
Oh,
maybe any other patient I've ever heard of, it's almost like you were spearheading your own care team. Like you really were an
oh,
advocate for yourself while in bed, while being cut on, while going through agonizing treatment and torturous procedures. And yet you were steering the ship toward it. So what kept you choosing the next right step in order to survive this thing rather than saying, you know what, we fought the good fight and I'm raising the white flag?
my baby. I would. Knowing he was fighting, I can fight. And it just, I find it very interesting how you describe these things as you fought through that. Like you fought through after the C-section to get through those other surgeries. I didn't do anything. I wasn't running the show. I was in a coma. So it's interesting when people say keep fighting. Today, it makes more sense. But back then, while in the hospital, and I just didn't, to me, there is no other choice but to keep going. I didn't see how it would be possible for me to just say no. I did advocate for myself and said no to certain things. I called a rapid response on myself because at that time I
By
wasn't
the way,
showing.
I've been in healthcare for a few years now. I don't think I've ever heard of a patient calling rapid response on themselves. And I know they have the right to do it. And I know there's a lot of nurses and doctors and clinicians up there being treated who have the knowledge to call it. But for you to be so self-aware and then
Mhm.
so bold to say, hey,
Yeah,
it's time.
Yeah, because all of these openings, and then I developed so many other wounds while being there. They could get infected so easily. And so I was just, I made sure that they would look top to bottom almost every shift.
Yes.
But with that said, in my mind, that knowing how things went down on the 17th, where I felt fine, and then all of a sudden I just tank, that's how it's going to happen again. If it's get bad, it will get bad. It will get bad fast. But unfortunately, I just wasn't providing the symptoms that are usually shown in order for the clinicians to call a rapid response. I was just like, I don't feel right. I was trying to say other words that would be like red flags, but all I wanted was a scan of my stomach because it just didn't feel right there. And then I started hallucinating, but hallucinations aren't really a symptom that calls for a rapid response. And yeah, as a nurse, I knew I could call my own, so that's what I said. And lo and behold, I was septic. And then I got the scan of my stomach and found out that I actually was producing urine, which is great because at that time I was in renal failure. But to show that your kidneys can produce urine, that's a great sign. But on that note, they still haven't fully recovered. So I still do dialysis.
You were in the ICU for 4+ months.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Then you go to the step down unit. Then eventually you get to ring a bell, go down, and I think you were in a white minivan, if I remember right.
Oh yeah, yeah. Inpatient rehab is where I was, and there there was another event that had happened called press, and it's for me, my blood pressure went high where my brain started swelling, and that caused seizures. So press occurred when I was in the hospital, and then again when I was in out, no, I'm sorry, inpatient rehab. So technically, I was in inpatient rehab and then back to the hospital, which killed me because I was, I saw the light at the
Yeah.
end of the tunnel. So that was a huge setback. But then we returned to inpatient rehab, which I, it was KU inpatient rehab, and I just want to make sure to say that because they were tremendous.
Yeah.
Those OT, all of their services were amazing. But I made some improvements. I was still healing and my wounds were not all closed. But during that time, my husband got a van because we were told before we can go home, we had to have a ramp and then we
Yeah.
had to have something to travel. So we did that. And the bell was something that they don't usually do. We were just joking that when I do go home, I'll need something to get people's attention if I need something. And they got me a bell. And that when ringing the bell, that was the last day I was in patient rehab. And you would think that I would go home, but we went straight to the casino right after I was discharged. Don't ask me why. We would talk about it when I was in the hospital, and I just wanted to make sure it happened. I didn't really win anything, but
I think you won plenty.
it was just being out. But it was
So,
my first kind of like realization of my limitations. I didn't even think about it, and it's so dumb. But I love playing blackjack. And then I was like, oh my God, I can't even pick up the cards. Luckily, I had family members to help, but still, it's just funny how I don't really recognize my limitations until it's right in front of me. And that was just one example.
and as you move forward in life, more and more limitations will become clear, and then
Yeah,
ways to overcome them will follow suit.
right.
But you eventually leave the blackjack table a winner. You get back into the minivan, and the street, there's video of this out there. The street is just lined
Oh,
with
yeah.
and
Oh my
friends
goodness.
and neighbors, and you became a celebrity online. So you have 400,000 Instagram followers, and 300,000 of them were on the streets, I think. So Kansas City rolls out the red carpet as you eventually make your way back home. What's it like to be gone for so long, sick, so broken, so cut up, so torn down, and then to begin rebuilding your life? What's it like to have that moment in time where you hear the music playing and you see the orange balloons and you realize, man, we're home?
And the signs, it was neighbors, those really close by and those far away from our area. And most were people I've never talked to, I've never met. And still, they were all at the end of their driveway and their kids, and they were waving like orange, whatever they could find orange, they had out, I think, which orange is the color for like the amputation. I
Yeah.
can't think of like the word, but how pink is for breast cancer. Those are the amputations. We have orange, which is a color I'm loving more and more just because of what it represents. But they had all of that, their stuff out, and just the signs that say, we're with you, we support you, we love you. And going by, I saw friends from college, people I haven't seen in a long time. We did make sure that I got into the house. If I had gone out and talked with people,
Yeah.
I was just exhausted.
You've been
Coming
playing
in,
blackjack all day.
yeah.
You, because I know we're nearing the end of our time, and I want to make sure I ask you a couple questions about people who are in particularly critical to your recovery. And in no particular order, let's start with the boys.
Mhm.
What's it like being back home with the boys and the way they see their mom?
When I first got to see them in the house, they were just like, "Hey, mom." There was no like running and
Underwhelmed.
jumping. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which I'm like, okay, I was hoping for a little bit more, but I'll let that slide. I got to see the baby. The baby's a baby. Again, he's doing great. He's thriving, which I love.
Yes.
The 3-year-old, over the past few weeks since being discharged, he was distant. I think because there's just so much, like with the wheelchair and my ostomy, and I still have an IV where it was hard for me to let him really jump all over me, which that's what
Yes.
3-year-olds usually do. It took a while until he figured out that there were rests on my wheelchair, and he pulled those down and he stepped right on them. And we will go for a ride around the kitchen and stuff. And that's how he started warming up to me. He also started putting my prosthetic on, and now it's back to normal where he'll cuddle with me. My 5-year-old seems to recognize things better, takes it with ease,
Yes.
but will ask about it randomly, completely randomly. He's, where are your arms? Will say, I got really sick, and the doctors, they had to take my arms and legs, and he's okay, and then just goes about his business. But there's some times where he'll say something that radiates, I don't know, it's just, it gives me chills and fear that this whole thing is impacting him in some way. He caught a glimpse of a picture of my arm when before they amputated it, and it was all black and blue. And I had no idea. He snuck up and looked, and he's, "Mommy, was that your arm?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that I got really sick." And again, he was like, "Okay." But just the other day, he goes, "Mommy, I wish you had your arm back. It was just so beautiful." And I was like, "Baby, I wish I had it too." I tell him like it makes me sad. But he's just a cuddle bug. He always gives me hugs, and I think he sees uh, the difficulty I'm facing. But we'll see what they think about it when they get older, and I'll tell them the whole story. Especially when Bo gets older, I want to make sure he knows that he saved my life.
Mm.
He's the one that I think truly saved me.
what as a father who's a little bit farther along the journey than you and dealt with my own amputations of my fingers. When my little girl was 5, so 5 is just such a great age. They're so curious, but once they have the data, they move forward. They're not
Yeah.
stuck on it anymore. They took the arms. Okay, done. We
Yeah.
don't need to go back to that one. So
Yeah.
a little girl up at school was staring at me. This was a new
Mhm.
little girl my daughter Grace just made friends with. So my daughter hands me her backpack, and then this little girl is just staring at me, almost like angry ice, and looks at my daughter and says, "What happened to your dad's hands?" And Grace was almost shocked by the question because for her, nothing. But she
Uh,
thought about it for a moment and then said, "Nothing. He just got burned it when he was a little boy, but he's fine now." And with that, this little girl looks at me, looks at my hands, hands me her backpack and says, "Hold this for me." And then they both go off and play. And so I think what you will find is that these children will treat you as if you're their mother and not
mhm.
much more or less than that, which is a
Mhm.
pretty cool way to do life, just as mom.
Yeah.
So you will be
Yeah.
very normal in their eyes and in time in the eyes of all their friends, which is one of my prayers for you. So
Thank
that's
you.
to come. But there's one other guy that I think we need to speak about before we let you move into your day, and it's my buddy Reed. The only person who has it worse than the patient being operated on and going through procedures and hysterectomies and amputations is the one who loves them, maybe even more than they love themselves. And the one who is balancing work and 2 boys at home and one child recovering at a hospital for being born early and everything else that is on his plate. So just walk me through what this experience has done, not for Reed specifically, but for you and Reed as a couple.
We live hour by hour. We don't think too far in the future. Just because with the history of how things have gone so far, if we hope for what the future looks like, we may not get that. We've been let down so many times. And so again, we live hour by hour and he does everything. Everything. And you gotta think about me, then a baby, 8 month baby, 3 and 5-year-old, all boys, and just the wrestling, the crying for no reason. It gets to him, but the moments we have together are being in the car, going to rehab, and then at night. And that's both areas where we decompress and ask each other, how are you doing? We're doing whatever we can to help him. It's slow, but we're chipping away little things. That's pretty much what rehab's all about is being as independent as possible. And hopefully we'll get to a point where Reed can actually feel like he can do something for himself without
Mm.
always worrying. And then for him to get back to work too. He wants to have that normalcy, but it's not going to be like it was. I know that. He knows that. So it's just finding a new normal. Everyone says stuff like that after these kind of things happen, especially being a parent. It's going to be a new way for him to be a father and a new way for me to be a mother. And that's hard to define. It's almost like having a newborn and not knowing what the hell you're doing.
Yes.
And once you get the groove of things, you feel confident, but then everything changes. We just try to recognize when each other needs a second because I will get down a lot. There, for some reason, something hits me where I'm just like, I, I can't be present right now. My whole focus is on like, why did this have to happen?
When you ask that, and I know you're in the middle of healing. So
Mhm.
it's not like, hey, your autobiography came out. This thing happened 24 years ago, and now you've processed it. But now that you are in the middle of the storm. Let's not be
Mhm.
confused. Just because you're out of the hospital doesn't mean you're in the clear. This is a journey, and you and the boys are on it together, but this is a journey. So when you ask the question, why today, what's the answer you're coming up with?
The why is it comes down to me contracting strep A. Strep A is everywhere, and my doctors think that I got strep orally and just didn't notice, and then it went through my bloodstream. So that's my why, is because just like you get a cold, why do you get a cold? Viruses are around us all the time, and especially with kids, they're cesspools of germs, and that's my why. I don't question it any further than that.
Do you believe your recovery and then through that your life is a miracle?
I think it was my dad helping out. That was why I'm here today. Somehow he did something to help out, and I know he probably worked harder to keep the baby alive because he just adored his grandkids, but he made sure my body remained strong. So if you want to take that as a miracle, having someone who has passed helping from beyond, where however people believe what that is, yeah, for me it's that he was there and made this possible. And so that might be a miracle. I'm not sure.
I anticipate in the years to come, you'll look back and recognize the profound nature that your life represents a miracle today. You're going to hear it from anybody who's aware of your story. There were 27 teams within your hospital working with you at one
Oh
time.
my
I
gosh,
mean,
right?
I had a pretty complicated case myself as a kid, but nowhere near 27 teams collaboratively working as one. Hundreds of people working behind the scenes to keep you alive. A mother bedside, a husband nearby, like just person after person fighting. So for your dad and your mother and your husband and the boys at
Mhm.
home and the one in hospital and everybody else in between, we're glad that you fought forward and that you are with us today. And so
Thank
we
you.
have 7 questions that tether all of our guests together, whether they are astronauts, presidents, mountain climbers, or just amazing overcomers like the one I'm in front of right now. But 7 quick questions, just quick answers. Question number one: what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Book by Atul Gawande, Being Mortal.
Cool. What's one positive characteristic or one trait that you possessed as a little girl growing up in Kansas City that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
Ignorance.
That's awesome. I was going to ask you about that. Was being a nurse helpful or hurtful in recovery? But we ran out of time. If your home caught fire and your boys, all 4 of your boys are out safely, and now you're outside safely as well, but you have an opportunity of going back inside and grabbing one item, what's that one thing you would grab from the house before it burned?
That's a hard one. And this sounds dumb, but my phone. There's a lot of pictures on my phone, but something physical. Oh, my hand that I kept. And yeah, we were able to receive just the bones back. And
Wow.
I have it in a memory box. It's pretty cool. It's you see just my hand, and it's the frame is all black. And I guess I would grab that if I needed to grab something more meaningful than a phone.
Gosh, there's so much there. Most of us would say, let that thing burn. It reminds me of
Mm.
what I'm not. Tell me why you think it's important enough that you would go in and grab it.
I don't want to let go of who I was before.
Yeah.
I'm still that person. It's still me, but that's just like a little part of me that I can feel.
Yes.
Uh,
Let's move forward then and put you on a bench on a
okay,
gorgeous day and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased. Who would you like to have right next to you?
my dad.
What's one thing you told your dad you're glad you did or you wish you had told your dad? So what's just something what's the first thing you would say to your dad?
I'm okay. I'm happy, and I'm working hard.
Hmm,
I guess it's a few things, but just to make sure he knows. Okay.
hmm. I'm okay. I'm happy. I'm working hard. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Don't stop yourself from learning more. I mentioned that palliative care, the professor, before I enrolled in that class. They said you're not losing money ever when you're gaining more information or being educated. So that's when I paid for that class. Because really, you're never wasting money when you're educating yourself.
My son is making me listen to his favorite band, which is Toby Keith lately. He's always
Uh-huh.
flexing in and out, but Toby's on the top of his playlist right now. His name is Henry. He's 14. So Henry and I this morning on the way to school, we're listening to a band, Toby Keith. This song I think was Red Solo Cup.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And then in our conversation, you said, I met my husband and he's passing out the red solo cups. And so it made me
Uh-huh.
Kobe in this party. So I'm going to take you back to that party for a moment.
Uh-huh.
What advice would you give yourself at that fraternity party? So at age 20, what advice would you need to receive that might benefit you today and tomorrow and going forward?
Just have fun. Try not to worry about these little things and make friends.
Brie Bauer. It has
Yeah.
been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like your one sentence to read?
Today. I'm gonna cheat because I wrote something down that
No cheating.
actually someone from Instagram commented, and they said it's that when looking at my Instagram, it's a daily reminder that we are more capable than we can imagine. So that, yeah, that's a perfect way to describe not only my mindset, but also what I possibly am providing other people to realize.
Whew, that's so good.
Mhm, mhm.
Brie Bauer, you are more than you thought possible, and you are reminding us of that fact and that truth in our lives too. What a gift. I'm sorry that this is the journey you've been on from February 17th going forward, but I have a feeling as you look back on your life, you'll recognize that this was an inflection point that led to the very best of your life. And
Yeah,
I look forward to walking with you toward that.
thank you. Thank you so much.
My friends, that is the great Brie. My name is John. Today is your day. What a gift it is. Live inspired.
Well, my friends, Brie Bauer is still in the midst of her journey. She chooses joy each day, and she chooses to find courage and strength and a reason to believe that the best is yet to come. For another powerful story of resilience, you'll love my conversation with another survivor, overcomer, and hero of mine. His name is Nando Parado. As one of 16 survivors of the harrowing plane crash in the Andes Mountains, Nando was stranded for 2 months before leading a 45-mile trek across frozen wilderness to find help. His story is an unforgettable testament to courage, leadership, and the triumph of the human spirit. You can listen to my buddy Nando Parado at episode number 84. Family, friends, leaders, servants, I want to thank you for tuning in to the Live Inspired podcast this time. And until next time, my name is John O'Leary. Today is your day. What a gift it is. Embrace it and live inspired.
Keeley Companies was started almost 50 years ago by the one and only Larry Keeley. What started as a small family-owned paving company in St. Louis has grown to a nationally known full-service construction, development, and restoration partner. Larry the Legend, as he is affectionately known, has been a part of this growth every step of the way and continues to provide guidance as his son Rusty, my buddy, drives their vision and achieves results on purpose. His unwavering foundation of a family culture with a focus on people has gotten Keeley Companies to where they are today, and their journey is truly just beginning. To learn more about Larry the Legend and Keeley Companies, check them out at KeeleyCompanies.com.